like this, that we don't want to really do a very structured discussion over the question and answers because the topic is such. So welcome everyone, all the participants. We had around 400 people who registered for this, and finally we can see people trickling in. Bhagat ji gives me a detail that normally you have 30 to 40% participation as against the number of people who register. So let's hope that it reaches to somewhere there. But already we have around 70 people here. So welcome all the participants who have joined the seminar, and also a huge welcome to Hari, Rohit, Meenakshi, and Ankur, who are part of this panel conversations. I think that when I shared these names with some of my friends in the fraternity, I think that how come you guys have really gathered the best of the guys to talk on this topic? And some people also shared with me a couple of flyers of previous sessions, and they said that, hey, we did this, but I think that the type of lineup you have is absolutely brilliant and makes huge amount of sense to hear it from people who have really transitioned from conventional industries to new age industry. And the topic had come to our mind, Hari, Meenakshi, Rohit, and Ankur, when in our own conversation last 1 year, we must have met many of the HR professionals, many of the organizational leaders, and I think that Rohit and I, we have interacted many times on this. Some things we clearly felt that the organizations are very different. There are two set of organizations existing in the economy. One are clearly old age organizations which run with the conventional wisdom. They have a lot of policies, processes, precedents which needs to really be looked at holistically. And there are set of organizations who are completely disrupting the way organizations work. And those are the ones which are being called as a startup. So I think that was a thought going on. And we also felt that when we meet up with people, everybody is hugely aspirational to get taste of these organizations, how it is to work in HR in these organizations, how it is to work in the business functions in these HR, these organizations, new age organizations, what we are calling about. So that's where the genesis of this whole idea was. And I reached out to Hari, Rohit, Meenakshi, and Ankur, and thanks to all four of you for really agreeing to be a part of this without really making me, run around and nudge you and follow up with you. So thanks a lot. Personal thanks to each one of you for being here. Just a brief introduction, Ankur, and then I'll hand it over to everyone as a formality. I think Hari doesn't require any introduction, and Hari is a person with 3 decades of experience in HR and business, multifaceted person. I think author, guide, coach, investor, advisor for different type of an organization, authored a couple of books, regularly featured on various magazines on his thought leadership ideas. From Pony to Unicorn is one of the books which he has co-authored and been very, very famous. He heads HR for Bigbasket and has worked in organizations like Tata Steel, IBM Daksh for his 3 decades of career. Alumni of IIM Calcutta and IIM IT Madras, and one of the guiding light for all the HR professionals in the industry. So thanks a lot, Hari, for joining and sparing time. I think that we'll be delighted to really hear your thoughts.
Thank you for having me, Yuvraj.
Thank you so much. Rohit is a great friend, and I think that Rohit and I know each other for last almost a decade, and his modesty, humility is something very, very infectious. He has been through companies like iShare, Bosch & Lomb, Cadence, GE, Microsoft, Accenture, Paytm, and now with the lead. So a profile which can be, matter of envy for many of the HR professionals. And Rohit has seen everything right from GE to Microsoft to Accenture to Paytm, and now in an organization which is just thriving organization. Lead is a organization which is in a brick and mortar and technology, very unique educational startup based out of Bombay. And I think since Rohit has joined, one can clearly see the way things are moving in the organization. So, and Rohit is again an XLRI alumni and worked with different organizations and been very, very closely associated with all the professional forums and has been happily contributing in everything in terms of his thought leadership. Rohit, great to have you here. Thanks once again with huge humility. Thanks for accepting this invite, and having you on the panel is a sheer pleasure.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I think it's a great topic. And whatever little bit I can share, of course, I learned so much from Meenakshi and Hari as well. I mean, I'm just a new baby in this entire startup world. So look forward to the questions and the interactions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. And Meenakshi, I think Meenakshi has made news by leading such a fantastic startup in last couple of years. I think Udaan is a very unique model. Udaan has really put many of the conventional processes around e-commerce to challenge, aggregating so many B2B suppliers and making life easy for small operators, leading currently a team of around more than 100 HR professionals, an organization with around 20 to 30,000 people. It's a huge role for Meenakshi to play, and I think that she's doing it with huge amount of aplomb, and people are talking about the type of practices Udaan has been in position to bring in. I always feel that her role is also hugely challenging because it's a setup or an organization which has tech as well as brick and mortar, very different type of profiles of people working, and bringing change or driving progressive HR practices would require great amount of in-depth experience and ability to nudge around and navigate within the organization. So Meenakshi, thanks a lot for being here and joining the panel. Meenakshi is a XLI alumni, worked with organizations like Yes Bank, Novartis, GSK, and now with Udaan. And I think that we will be privileged and extremely delighted to hear Meenakshi's views, which will be a very, very refreshing take on what we have been doing in HR. Thanks a lot for joining, Meenakshi.
Such a pleasure to be here. Just still learning, newbie, bacha actually, in the startup ecosystem. So as much as I look forward to sharing, I'm really looking forward to listening and learning from the forum. Yeah, look forward to the interaction. Thanks a lot,
Meenakshi. Thank you so much. And finally, our man of the moment, Mr. Sethi. I think Ankur is moderating this conversation. Ankur, I think for Ankur, I don't know what is he really doing. I think that he does such deep work in the education space. His corporate Shiksha is one of the most humble, modest, and also stable organization in the corporate learning space I've seen. Ankur does very, very discerning work, works with great leaders. I think the type of sessions, the type of programs he has been running online, offline, without really tom-tomming much about it, has really created a lot of learning for people, and it has made its name and space in the minds of people who are in the corporate learning. Ankur personally is a very what do you call, likable person for that matter. I think that's how I will talk about him. He's an alum of NMIMS, has done a variety of roles in his life. I think that started with banks, and then I think that now where he has reached is the CEO of corporate Shiksha in the space of corporate learning. I have seen him moderating sessions. I've seen his questions are very, very deep, and also evokes a lot of passionate response from people, while he continues to be very composed and patient in listening. So Ankur is the moderator for this session. I once again welcome everyone who's here in the session, and I'm sure at the end of it, even if we are in position to take few nuggets out of these whole sessions, I think it will be worth practicing, worth remembering while we are working in the HR, and also perhaps trying to make a career shift or teach or educate people in the industry. Thanks a lot. Once again, welcome everyone. Over to you, Ankur. All yours to navigate this for next 1 hour. Thank you so much, everyone. Once again.
Thank you so much, Yuvraj, for that interesting introduction, and also asking me to do this. So, and I'm sure all of you would want to hear the least from me, because you have such an interesting panel who have such diverse and rich experience. Personally for me, it was a fanboy moment when I also messaged Hari about hosting this, and he's on the panel. So it's a great pleasure to be doing this. And for me personally, National HRD Network has always the biggest space in my heart, because I've been associated with the body back in 2007 onwards in various different avatars. So super excited to be doing this. And I think the topic that Yuvraj has really brainchild, and the team which has thought of this, I think very, very, very interesting at this time, because as you must have heard this saying that the grass is greener from the other side, and all that glitters isn't gold. For many professionals, that's probably a state of mind at this stage where there is so much talk of the town around joining startups and making a lot of money and fast tracking careers that most of us hear stories that people are attracted towards joining a startup. And I was reading this report by Economic Times the other day that significant majority, close to about 75% of corporate leaders, and this had a sample size of about 1,250 leaders, were choosing to join startups compared to large established organizations. So there is definitely something going on, and we have a great panel today to be listening in. So I think without further ado, I think let's go over to each one of you and first get to understand, how was this shift? I will first go to Meenakshi and then go to Rohit and then Hari in that order. When you made this shift initially, how hard was this decision in your personal capacity, having worked with, really, really large global companies, Meenakshi, like the GSK, the Novartis, the Johnson & Johnson, and, this new kid on the block, which is of course a very big unicorn now, but how hard or easy was it? What was your mind share then? So tell us about that, and then we deep dive into other things.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very good question. It took me a while to sort of think through this and make the decision. I think, however, the decision sort of, if you start reflecting, as if I started my career and I did a startup when startups were not this glamorous. Really, really ages back. I was one of the first 25 people at Yes Bank. So when Yes Bank, I remember calling my dad and telling him I've joined Yes Bank, and he thought somebody's making a fool out of his daughter sitting in Bombay, saying, what is it? Is it an acronym? It's not a bank that I've heard of. Thankfully, Business Standard did an article on them, and then he thought that, okay, fine, there's actually a bank like that, but work with lease furnitures and no pay structure there. So was always sort of attracted to building something, right? Saw the journey from 25 to 2600 before I moved on to J&J, and then started a very classic multinational career, right? Johnson & Johnson, local jobs, regional jobs, global jobs, went on to Novartis, went on to GSK, before again taking this call. I think I started sort of at the peak. I remember I was in Basel, I was in Switzerland with Novartis headquarters, when I sort of reflected where I want to spend next 20 years of my prime career and how do I want to spend it. And one of the reflections was that, can I bring it back to build something in an Indian context? So I came back actually with GSK in India, asking them to be back in India, because I wanted to start reflecting and build something around here. When Udaan came as an opportunity, actually, I didn't know much about Udaan, and I started interacting with the co-founders and the board, and was very, I think it gave me an opportunity to actually sort of think and say, can I now build and bring in all experiences to build something that can solve a problem that's not being solved in this country? That's what Udaan does. It was the first e-commerce company in business to business e-commerce space. And yeah, so it wasn't an easy one, right? Because you get set and you work in established systems, structures, organizations, you know how it all works, and navigation and how it's done. And all of a sudden you take on a CHRO role in a company which is running at a speed of 100x of where you've been at. But it was a good challenge to take on. I thought, let me go learn and figure out what this is all about in terms of e-commerce and tech startups. And that the learning and the joy of creating something uniquely Indian was what pulled me in finally, if you ask me, more than anything else. I think I know you mentioned wealth creation and many other opportunities, which are great attractive factors of startup ecosystem. But I think that I don't think can solely drive a person and keep them engaged in working in this kind of an ecosystem. It needs a lot of internal inherent motivation to be able to be here. So that's a little bit of my story of why and the deliberative decision making, Ankur.
So cool. And how was the family's reaction? Was it another like a Yes Bank episode, or was it different this time?
So my family sort of, my daughter is in 6th grade. This is her 5th school. So I took her as she started her first grade. She moved countries, another country, then came back to India and to Bombay and came back into Bangalore. So I think she sort of adapted, but she's given me a warning, better stay in one city now, at least for a few years. Husband's been supportive. He knows if I'm not happy working and making choices in my career, I won't be a happy wife. So he's a wise husband, let me put it that way. And has a great employer who enables him to be a wise husband as well.
A part of this recording has to go to him now. So thank you for saying that. Thank you. So moving on to Rohit. So Rohit, Meenakshi's decision for making this shift was the first time, but you've done it twice. So once could be an accident, twice definitely can't be. So how has been your journey, especially with Paytm and now with Lead School? How was your thought process of making this shift? Because you've really worked with, again, very, very large companies like Accenture, Microsoft, GE, where, most of us aspire to be in those positions where you've been. So how was, tell us a little bit about how have you thought through this when you made those shifts?
Sure. Thanks very much. And I think for me, it was a very practiced call. I mean, I wanted to do it. So if you, as a HR professional, again, a lot of my learning is from sports. Like, I grew up playing sports. I still love playing sports. So I think in sports, the element is, the more different opponents you play with, the more different pitches you play on, because you become stronger. So that's why I think through my career, working with heavy engineering with iSure or 5 different kinds of organizations in GE aircraft engines and energy or Microsoft or, Accenture as consulting, it's been about, hey, what surfaces can I play on? And I think one part of my, moment when I was at Accenture and Microsoft, again, I was very fortunate because they had accelerator programs. So sitting on the outside, I would work with many founders and I would more learn from them also. And I also advise them about the HR elements or products and so on. And then, one saying, there's an old Indian saying, which kind of goes something like, it's easy to be brave from a distance, so, and I was always admired about how the courage that these guys had of starting a startup and said, hey, I can give them advice from the side, but I think how's it like to play, inside and really experience what a startup is. And it also, in my sports analogy, it's like, okay, if you played Wimbledon all your life, or what's it like playing on a, on a Roland Garros, on a clay court? It's the same tennis, but it's a different surface. And will I last there or will I not? No, will I not? So I guess that's what was an element for me to say that I want to make a transition into startups. I want to see if I succeed there. I can fail as well, in which case I can always bounce back and do something else. But I think that's what catapulted me towards this entire element. And like I said, I'm still learning tremendously there. And when you look at some of the transition or the changes, okay, I would say in an established company, I wouldn't classify it as an old company or a new company. I would say established organizations. Like I would say Microsoft also evolves a lot. Accenture evolves a lot. They're all evolving organizations. They're all new age in their own ways, but they're not a startup, right? So I would look at this entire discussion as an evolved, organized company to work for versus a startup, which is an evolving organization. So what I'll mention below, I think our challenges prevalent in both, but the intensity and the amount of effort is exponentially different. So I think the transition that that one makes, or let's say I made, was and the differences were in the elements of how does one build credibility for the organization? These organizations are, the HR function within them is still evolving. The organization is still evolving. The jury on how successful will they be, is still out there. So that's a transition that you've got to make. Doing whatever it takes to get the job done. There is no cushion. There is agility is at a different level that is kind of needed, in a company like this. Speed to get things moving. Thinking that a wrong decision is better than no action. But just taking a decision, I think how important that is. And I think elements like an ownership. Think like an owner. Think like an investor. That element where the stakes are high, again, are elements that one has to think about. So The initial part was, if you read the Asterix comics, when somebody comes in and says, hey, these Romans are crazy, but kind of, once you come in there and once you really play a active part of what you're doing, then you also realize and learn tremendously from the method in the madness. So like I said, for me, it was a very rehearsed, thought through, planned decision. And I'm very fortunate to have got an exposure both at Paytm first and now, of course, at Lead School, which I absolutely love. So I'll pause there.
Fantastic. So from driven by purpose to driven by a sense of creating more strength and diversity in your portfolio, I'm getting two different reasons from two different leaders. Now, I heard this saying, Hari, that startups are like dog years. It's almost, if you spend a year there, it's like spending a decade in larger companies. Frankly, I'm a little nervous talking to you because you are a veteran. I don't know what should I be asking you, but you made this decision, moving out of startup from large organizations, I think in the year 2019, 20, and now, is probably a lot more acceptable and easier from the mindset point of view, compared to back then in 2014 when you made that switch. And you've had such large tenures in companies like Tata Steel, so you probably worked with some of the largest brands globally from India. So how was your decision? What was, if you recall some of those moments, what made you move on to Taxi for Sure and then Bigbasket, and then you've been with them for so long? Help us by reflecting something that crossed your mind at that moment.
So actually, Ankur, I made the move to startups in 2002. So that was my first startup, which was Daksh. So I started my career at Tata Steel, and I loved the first 10 years. I am a passionate mechanical engineer, and Tata Steel provided me the right, platform forum to be able to test my mechanical engineering skills on the ground. So I thoroughly loved it. But I think as I progressed into middle management, somewhere there was a sense of frustration that this was not the kind of organization that I wanted to work for. It was a very large behemoth. Decisions were taken very slowly. The entire process, of launching something new, you had to consult a bunch of mediocre people who had no stakes, no skin in the game, and yet you needed the buy-in. And that was not the kind of place I really wanted to work as I scaled in my career. So I took the call of moving on to this company called Daksh. And my decisions always have been to join teams that I respect and I love. I've never really figured out or thought a lot about, is this a company I should work for? Are they in the right kind of business? Will they scale? Those have never occupied my mind. I've just thought about, is this a bunch of people I would love to hang out with? Are they going to be people I can learn from? Will they be people I respect? So I took that call and joined Daksh. For me, frankly, it was like moving from an oil tanker to a fighter jet. The kind of, agility that was required in this new company, the pace at which decisions were taken, the chaos that prevailed, and the fact that you had to thrive in all this chaos, I think, which makes me come to the question often, which is that can large companies ever be truly innovative? And I want to take a non-judgmental position on this, and I'm not trying to judge really, but somewhere, I do believe that it's very difficult for large companies to be innovative. I think over a period of time, small companies go on to become big, they become super big. And then there's a lot of, coordination, which is necessary. They're all very stable. They have a bunch of people administering, program managing. All those people become gradually very important. And, it's like asking, can elephants dance? Probably elephants can dance, and Lou Gerstner saw an elephant that could dance and he wrote a book about it. But none of us have really watched elephants dance. So I find it very difficult to believe that large organizations will find doing innovation very easy. Having said that, I think large organizations bring an element of stability, and stability not just for the business, but also for people. And there are people who love stability, and there are people who love chaotic environments. I have thrived in chaotic environments. In the first 2 months at Daksh, I thought probably I'll be fired, because I came from a large company. The way I thought was, when I first went to meet the CEO for the first meeting, I took a notepad in hand, trying to, listen to what he's saying and taking notes. And in 2 minutes, he asked me, will we have a dialogue or will this monologue continue? So I quickly realized, that the pace is very different. But then I also realized this was exactly the kind of place I have been waiting for. I mean, this is really, me. I've been looking for a place like this. So I think very quickly I began loving it. For the last 20 years, I have loved it. It's been without exception. Every year has been a learning. If I had to do anything else, I wouldn't do anything else. And I've moved on from these startups at the right points of time when there was a successful exit, or when I felt that, I've outlived my life at that particular company. And I've always moved on to a different startup, and it's never been to a large company. And I'm not trying to say that large companies are not good at all. I'm just saying that it was not the kind of place for me. So large companies are very stable. Smaller companies are very chaotic. Smaller companies probably have a higher degree of element of innovation. And probably, some people may not like it. So I think net, that's worked out for me. I've loved the chaos.
So that makes me think, when we talk about learning and creating a culture of learning and innovation, is that really something that's possible with larger teams? That, how have you seen the two shades of learning, for instance? You said you're not coming in from a point of being judgmental about it. So let's think about it from a point that probably it is possible to create cultures of learning and innovation. Help us with some, distinctions that you've seen of how, let's say, a Tata Steel has been managing learning, creating capability building and innovation, and of course, compare it with the same thing in the startup environment. What are some things which are different that could be useful for us on the call to get a different flavor of the same thing?
Frankly, I think there is a huge difference, Ankur, in the way, smaller agile companies approach learning and development, or the way they need to approach learning and development, the way larger companies do. And here I'm just trying to be very candid, which is that I found that, the approaches to learning in large companies have not been really very effective. The entire approach is to put people into classrooms, teach concepts, separate learning and from work. And, and as a result of which, learning never really happens in a very proper way. And that's very evident in the fact that whenever there's a budget cut, learning is the first element to be cut out, because nobody seems to really believe that learning is, really contributing to, business as such. In startups, I think the way they need to approach learning is very different, because people really don't have the time to go away from work, sit in classrooms and attend training programs. So I think it's very important in fast-paced environments to integrate learning and work. So while you work, you have to also be learning. Every work element has to have a component of learning built into it. And some of them do it very thoughtfully, and some of them do it very intuitively. I think most of them do it very intuitively. Some do it more thoughtfully. So for instance, I would say they somewhere embrace a 70-20-10 model, which is that they believe 70% of the learning happens, by being thrown into the deep end, by doing, difficult tasks, by dealing with stretch goals and OKRs. 20% of the learning happens through very insightful conversations, and very little, which is 10% or less, happens through classroom-based training. And I think there are very powerful mechanisms to build this learning into work. So for instance, right, you can have a monthly review meeting. In one of the companies that I've worked for, we had this idea of a monthly review meeting. And I would say if you survive 6 monthly review meetings in a row, you could write a completely different CV. And that different CV would be very different from what you started off with. It would be, a significant enhancement in your character. You would have learned to deal with very difficult questions. You would have learned how to answer, why not, what if, so what, all those very difficult questions you would have learned to answer. So I think a monthly review meeting is a very powerful forum to create all kinds of learning, also to create character in individuals. It's a place where you can spot talent. You can see who is performing well, because middle management teams come in and present. So in one single forum, you're able to do, your talent spotting, talent assessment. You're able to think of succession planning. Your entire management team is sitting in those meetings. So there is a collective view that's developed about some key individuals in the company. And, you're able to build character in individuals, because if they can stand that difficult questioning, they come prepared, they're facing those difficult questions. They can't be any more powerful learning than that. You can't just send a person to a classroom and build character. It never happens that way. one other powerful learning mechanism. For example, if you want to teach someone conflict management, there's no point sending the person to a classroom and teaching the person a Thomas Kilmann instrument, right? Instead, if the person accompanies a senior leader who is going into a meeting where he or she is actually dealing with conflict, then this individual can observe this manager or leader dealing with conflict firsthand and then begin to learn how to deal with conflict, for example. So you have to build learning into work. The moment you divorce learning and work as two separate things, then neither will happen. People will not turn up. They will sign up for the program, but will not turn up. So in large companies, that's a consistent problem, which is people don't turn up for, a lot of learning and development programs. Learning and development programs are always cut out whenever there's a budget cut because they're not truly effective. They're just done for the sake of doing. A bunch of vested interests, the training teams, development teams have all come together and driving an agenda. And that agenda, a bunch of people are colluding to, keep that going until the reality strikes, which is that you don't have the budgets to, do these side things. You need to really do something different. So I frankly believe that a large number of large companies, the way they handle learning and development is not really very effective. And I'm not saying the small companies do it extremely well, but I think small companies have to necessarily by force build learning into work. And that's the only way learning will ever happen.
Great points. And Yuvraj echoes that sentiment. I want to move on to Meenakshi now. In that context, where, and you talked about a large team that you've now built in Udaan. Now, having worked in larger organizations and now, what is the difference? When I'm just taking the example of what Hari mentioned, going to the CEO with a notepad, and that's more like a business partner conversation. So talking about HR business partners, how it used to happen in larger organization and what it takes to be a successful HR VP in this context. What are some things which have really evolved and are non-negotiable to perform well in this job? And so maybe if we start from there, then we need to learn from your perspective on that.
It's a very good question. I'm reflecting on my almost 2 years now at Udaan, right? I think a few things. I think one is that, and I think HR business partners in large organizations also need to be business partners. They need to understand business pretty well. I think you just add a massive accelerator of agility and speed on top of it. So you have to be really tuned into what's happening. And in case of businesses which are following no playbook, if you're building something which is not being built in India or globally, I think you really put a top spin as to what does it mean to be a partner for such a business. You have to be really, really agile. And what does agility mean? I think agility means a few things in this case, right? And let me just articulate them. I think to me, one is agility means managing an ability to manage paradoxes pretty well in your head and balance things, right? So when you come from large organizations, and all startups believe in, and I do believe they do, institution building even as they build and solve problem and figure out their model, right? Now, it's very, very difficult for people to keep these two seemingly opposite pieces in their head. How do you think short term today here with a institution building concept in mind? Because culture is happening as we are doing and building and rebuilding and pivoting, right? I think managing these two paradoxes and keeping and staying in that paradox of what could be opposing ideas. People I have seen in startup world sometimes struggle with, but we were wanting to expand month before. What happened? Why are we pivoting now? Right? How do I sort of grapple with this need for speed? And I will tell you, when I joined, we had planned from moving from 25 to 50 cities in 3 months' time. We changed the plan from 25 to 500 cities in 3 months' time. I don't think in a large organization, how would that have worked? And we made that pivot in October. We delivered it by December. And today we are sitting on 900 cities in that 18-month time frame, right? And I think so this need for speed, agility, tuned in, thinking how to deliver with speed in a startup ecosystem is very important, but still not lose sight of what does it mean to still build things which are foundational and long-term in an organization. So I think that's one piece of agility. I think the second piece is massive change resilience. I think as HR business partners, you are partner and coaches of leaders who need to be change resilient, who need to sort of figure out how do they ride this wave of change and lead. And you are doing a lot of things. So you're an absorber of a lot of changes and flux that is happening in the business, because you're also a listening post. So if you don't have a very deep change resilience, if you don't have a strong ability to manage, navigate, adapt, and move forward, how would you coach leaders and businesses and partners to land it right? So I think second piece of that agility, I think to me, is change resilience in specifically startup context and moving fast and forward. I think the third piece I would say is leverage the experience, but really quickly unlearn, right? There is, to me, a lot of people talk, and I was on another forum, which was on rewards. And, and I was talking to them, and it was a forum of large, big players who all come together and share how they are thinking of compensation and strategies and so on and so forth. And I said, well, it's good to understand what people are doing, but if you benchmark everything, you would be an average. And to me, I think not having an ability to think first principles, to really truly think what you're building, what is needed for the organization, you would stay average. And that to me is a core fundamental foundation of building something unique, addressing a business need, moving ahead with speed, and not getting caught. That's why I say leverage experience, because experience is beautiful, and I'm not at all negating experiences, right? It gives you intuition. It makes you move with speed. What I said, it gives you agility and varied experiences. Loved Rohit's example. I'm also a proponent of it. Every role that I've done has been different from my previous role. Every industry that I picked up has been different from the previous industry. Every geography was different. And I kept moving it because it builds you muscle. It gives you context, right? It gives you intuition. But that shouldn't become a base of, I am doing this because I did this somewhere else and hence it should work, right? And fundamentally, I think we made, and I think Yuvraj was talking about some of the changes we did. We took a completely different stance on how we look at our ESOP structure very recently, which we published to our employees. And I don't think any benchmarking would have helped. I spoke to companies in Silicon Valley. I know the practices of Indian startup ecosystem. I considered how and where markets will evolve. I think it was fundamentally based on what we are trying to build and why. And what does it mean and how does it serve our purpose, both from a business perspective and talent perspective. So I think these three to me, as part of that agility, is very, very critical, right? So really high top speed execution by staying fully tuned in, change resilience, and managing paradoxes together, short and long. And third to me is leverage learning, but don't be a slave to it, of your experiences, sort of really bring unique perspectives in to solve first principles. That's what I would say.
Many of them are dichotomies, right? In the mind, it's hard to sort of balance both, but great points. And I think it'll be fair to get others' view as well. And I'd want to get Rohit and Hari as well to comment on this, because for any HR professional to view this later on or on the call right now, to be able to see, okay, if I want to make that switch, or if I've made that switch and I want to grow into a position like the folks on the panel, what is that is going to accelerate my career? So Rohit and Hari, anyone wants to add anything additional to what Meenakshi said of what it takes to be a great HR business partner in a startup environment or an?
I think actually Meenakshi summed up very, very well. I think your points are very focused, and I think the only other thing I would say is, it's kind of like talking kind of today morning, and I think it's like, and if you want to make a switch, either ways, from an established company to a startup, from startup to an established company, I think it's the analogy that I give about Indians want to come back to the US, from the US to India, right? I think 80% of them fail when they transition after some time because they can't adapt to India. Either they can't, they are cribbing about something or the other, and very real crib. The education doesn't come on time, the safety isn't there, school's bad, education, the crib, right? It's not a successful transition either ways. I'm saying either ways, and I think somewhere this, when Nash talking about the element to look at the past but don't be a slave to it, I would just say that the innate desire to seek out something new, to build that muscle that you don't have, to build that shot, like I said, my example of a grass court versus a clay court, The ball will come slower. There'll be more rallies. There won't be less, serve and volleys that you can pretty much do. But having that bone in your brain and your heart to kind of say that, okay, I'll try something new, that to be successful in, it's the same backhand, it's the same forehand, it's the same rules. But that I think is the most important part that will make a successful shift. So be it an HR VP, be it a talent acquisition manager, be it a comp and ben leader, and one has to adapt to a different environment around you and be real about why you want to adapt. There's no need to adapt. You're doing well where you are, then don't make the transition. That's the only thing I would add, Ankur.
Fantastic. Would love to hear from you, Hari. Anything else which you think?
Oh, no, I don't have anything to add to Meenakshi and Rohit have said. I think they're very complete between them.
Fantastic. So the takeaway is, I think, be driven by purpose. There'll be a lot of attraction to pay, but that's the other side of the coin. And to Hari's point, I think the way when he made the switch, he looked at the team. So I think that's also very, very fundamental to not just join any startup, join the right team, and then probably they can pivot to something else in the future, and that could be a large company in itself. So, coming back to you, Rohit, in terms of now, a couple of startup environments that you've seen, what are some differences that you've seen in terms of how the entire people in culture? I know the verbiage is different. It's HR and talent in the larger organization, and it's people and culture in the startup environments usually. But beyond the words, what really is difference? Is there any difference, or is it just old wine in new bottle?
And again, I'll just caveat my response with I spent 25 years in large companies. I spent 2 years in startups. So I'll give you my feeling till now, my initial response. I would say the aspiration to hire the best talent, the aspiration to have a performance organization, performance-based organization, a performance management system that works, the aspiration of hiring the appropriate compensation, the right compensation for the right people for the right roles, is there across both. If I think of it on a point of time, maybe organized companies may be more evolved with their systems, processes, how they do it, the robustness of it, than a startup. But for me, it's more an element about the growth of the company to where it is right now in a startup to where it needs to be to sustain itself. The initial parts are about, I've got the money from the investor. I've made a certain commitment to, what I want to get to in the next 2 years or 3 years. I've got a whole bunch of challenges to kind of figure out. I don't have a good enough brand. I've got to hire the right people with a sense of purpose, a sense of inspiration to kind of, really, drive the company to where it needs to be driven. So I guess the empowering part of a startup, I'll pick on a part that Hari was talking about in terms of being one person amongst a larger organization in an evolved company, a mature organization, versus being the person or a small team to kind of take decisions in a small startup is a speed and independence in decision making. In what Meenakshi spoke about, tailoring the ESOP plan to what her company kind of needs. It's an entire element which is like very exhilarating speed, and you figure things out on the go. And I think the maturity of the system may come over a certain point in time, but the aspiration is similar. In terms of a brand, many times, startup still has to build that brand. Many times, they haven't heard about the company that they're trying to join, or they're from different. The aspiration levels of different people are different to what the startup does, and so on. So I guess that brand attraction might be different for a startup, or a more stronger, pull for a larger brand. So you may have some negatives there, but if you can again build a sense of purpose, your value proposition, all those elements, then it's kind of it's much stronger. Now the performance management, in my opinion, might appear more random again in a startup, but the element is that in fact in a startup, the focus on performance is higher because you cannot have deadwood floating. You can't have, it's like an orchestra, right? I mean, if that drummer or that bass guitarist, it's just a lean team normally. If that one player is kind of, is out of sync or out of chord, the whole orchestra, kind of, goes down, because you don't have too much of like a buffer to kind of, to keep the noise down. So I guess the performance elements, in which case, it might sound more random to an employee in a startup. People might not have a very, very effective one-on-one every month or every quarter or every 6 months or whatever else. But I think that's, in my mind, it's a stage of evolution of that startup to where it wants to get to. And it eventually does want to get there. So, but the 3 elements that you mentioned over here, hiring, compensation, performance, are equally important. And I would say even more critical, in a startup, than they are in an established company, because, there is a lot of, like I said, a lot of compensating factors in a large company, which a startup will be very exposed to if it doesn't, do that well enough.
And, just double click on the same thing. Some practices like parental leaves or, other benefits that you hear about, or forever, unlimited leaves. And, we've even heard things like BMW bikes and all of that for attracting, retaining talent. Is it that they exist in larger companies as well, or is it just that we hear this from startup a lot?
See, I would call them more as differentiate. I would say benefit differentiators. The benefit differentiator, or let's say total reward differentiators. I think exist in all companies. Because all companies, like, really, I do believe the war for talent is real across any company today. And the companies are trying to innovate or look at their organizations as more aspirational for talent, right? So I've heard of large established companies, giving BMWs and international holidays as well, as they want to attract or retain talent. I've heard of startups like do that as well. So from my perspective, at least, I think it is the fit for purpose. What is the purpose you are driving? What's a good fit over there? I don't think I've seen too many startups do stupid things, around any of these elements. They're doing it, not just to create hype, but they're doing it maybe in a certain sense about differentiating themselves or retaining a certain talent or whatever else. So again, in my mind, it's similar. I think I've seen large companies do it as effectively as small companies as well. The companies I worked in, for example, haven't done anything as radical as some of this stuff. We haven't needed to till now, but if we need to, maybe we will. That's at least my point of view, Ankur.
Fantastic. No, thanks so much. So before we dive into
the only thing I would add though is that in a large company, sometimes you do stuff because it comes down, the organization. So you have to implement stuff that is coming down. Okay. In a startup, the ability to shape it to your needs, because the buck starts with you. And in that sense, have the sense that you are doing to others what you felt happening to you all the time when things came to you, is something that I think is the level of maturity I think people who craft schemes or policies or whatever should keep in mind as they announce these to people across the organization.
Yeah, and that can be a big one. On the ground, this can contextually become very, very different ammunition for that war for talent. So thanks for that. And I see there are close to 100 people on the call, and I see relatively quite a chat room. So would love to hear all of you. Is this making sense? Are we going in the right direction? Is there anything that's on your mind which you'd like Hari, Rohit, Meenakshi to respond to? This is your time. I'm just your spokesperson. I have just one more question, and then thank you for that thumbs up. Even a reaction would be nice to see that you are all connected, you're following, and this is being of some use. So being a founder myself, I know working with founders can be very tricky because, there is a very, very volatile and very disruptive environment that one is functioning in. And like Meenakshi alluded to earlier, plans can really be changing very, very fast, and hence also for an HR leader to work with a set strategy, and especially more so with folks who have worked with larger organizations, because that sort of conditions your mindset to work in this kind of partnership with the founding team. How has been your experience, and if you'd be open to talking about both good things and not so good things, that would be great use for others to learn from your experience. So can I go to Hari first, and then I'll go to Meenakshi and then Rohit.
So, Ankur, I have thoroughly enjoyed myself in the last 20 years. I don't think I can even talk about, one or two examples where, I was frustrated or I was unhappy. And the large reason is because I chose the teams that I work for very carefully. Every single company that I picked for, I had a great deal of respect for the team. I loved working with the team, and I felt that, I can learn as well. So I think I don't think I can really call out anything particular that I disliked. So overall for me, I think this fast-paced, being able to, deal with fluidity in terms of goals, fluidity in terms of everything else, 25 locations becoming 500 locations, becoming 200 locations, was something that, is par for the course. So in fact, this is what precisely I might have missed in my first company, and where everything was pretty predictable, linear, and nothing uncertain. And that was not what I really enjoyed. So this is an environment that I thoroughly loved. And it's not that, we never made mistakes. We made mistakes, but we collectively learned things along the way. And 20 years down the road, I think I think overall, I understand the ecosystem better. I understand the nature of problems. I understand the nature of solutions. If I listen to a problem, probably I can instantly figure out what is the right kind of answer. So I think overall, I've learned a lot, and I have nothing to really complain about.
How beautiful is that? I will have to come back to you on a question on this, but let me go to Meenakshi and then get her response as well.
I think it's a very good question, right? I think I echo with Hari, but I'll do some double clicks on it, right? So I think it's super critical for me, irrespective of whether it was Udaan or another firm. It was super critical to understand the teams and the leaders I would be working with, and on multiple levels, right? I think so. I spend deep number of conversations. I don't do one. I actually seek out multitude of conversations, not just with the founders, but also with the team and the people who work with them. And it is the same when I actually was dialoguing with GSK. Actually, the person who wanted to hire me at GSK, I knew him very well. But I said, no, let me chat with the others and have a dialogue, right? Because ultimately you are joining an organization and a team, and specifically in startups, they're not established names. So you don't know what the cultural markers are. You don't know what they stand for. Many of the other known names, you would know people who work there. So I think it's super critical to spend time understanding, is there an echo, whatever works for you. And different individuals are different on what works for them, why they make choices. You just heard at the start, right? As in what mattered to me, topmost came was purpose. What mattered to Rohit, topmost came as learning and playing on different pitches, right? What matters to Hari first came was, can I work with that team, right? And I think for different people, different things matter in priority and rank of prioritization. And if you don't know yourself well and you haven't ticked that box, I think any assimilation gets a little difficult, right? So I think to me, spending that time, so for me, it was very important to really connect and to say, what is the purpose of this? What is the purpose of these people? Are they really driven by this, right? I think that's first. I think second is, in a startup ecosystem and with a founder, I think the pressures are very different. It's a fact. The pressures are extremely different. I worked in organizations that could write off 2,600 crores and shut down a factory because it did not make sense and it wasn't fitting in a portfolio. Larger companies, it had the cash flow. In a startup, when you're evolving, proving a business model, you're figuring out whether it would work, the mindset is very different. And I think you need to stay tuned in and have a very clear understanding of the paradoxes that I spoke. If you can't work with those and understand it, it can get difficult, I think. And I think that's super critical. I learned that, right? I understood that, right? And I understood and got a window because I really probed and went in as to what's going on in your head. So every time I heard, I would ask multiple second and third level questions so that I could understand better. I think third is think and figure out. In HR, you have to be a coach. A lot of startup founders and co-founders are also on their leadership journey. You need to see whether they have the humility and you have the humility to learn from them and they learn from you and evolve in it together. as a leadership cohort. And if it doesn't happen on any of these three, the remaining double clicks I can do more, but then you're not set up, right? So I think it's super critical on these three reflections. I have seen different people. About the first startup that I was with, I saw CXOs in operation with the founder and promoter. I was not a CXO, right? And when you become a CXO, you get into the shoes. I think it's important to sort of learn, move, but also take a call early on. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's okay. It's all right. It's not about being in a startup or a large organization. It can happen anywhere, right? I think till the time you are quite set in what you are doing, you know why you have gone into something, you have gained what you need to gain. It's all right. The time is, if it doesn't work, is to move on and find the next passion. Hari said it very nice. If I see a good exit or my time is done, I move to the next one. Right? That's what I would say.
Fantastic. That's helpful. Rohit, working with the CEO, an executive versus a founder can be very, very different, like Hari and Meenakshi have spoken about. You work with, in the past, you worked with one of the poster boys of the Indian startup ecosystem. VSS has been really a name that a lot of us proudly reckon with. So how has been your experience? Tell us, some interesting stories or something that you can share it out open. And I will again double click on this. Both good and bad would be equally things to learn from.
Sure. So again, I won't go with people. I'll talk about founders in general, and both the people include people I've worked with and people a lot of my friends are working with. So the question is more around the expectation of founders. And again, good part of having got 25 years in the industry is that you have a lot of friends who are also in startups, and you kind of, with my interest in startups, I've spoken to a lot of them about founders and what they're like. So first of all, my first comment is that a lot of hype around the money people make, the founders make when it goes IPO or whatever. My thing is they deserve it. Just the passion, the intensity. It is a different breed, guys. Founders are a different breed. And their energy, their passion, the agility, the pressure that they carry to get a company set up. I mean, of course, I'm not saying CEOs don't have pressure. CEOs also have pressure. I'm sure the CEO of a large company, multinational, has pressure. But I think this is something they are starting from scratch. And I think they absolutely deserve the fame, the recognition, the wealth that they deserve, that they get. That's my first one. I think as an employee working with founders with that intensity, they would typically, an average founder would put far more number of hours than I think the hardest amongst us as professional kind of put in. That's at least my experience, both of working with them and talking to friends who kind of work with them. But to keep up that pace, to be successful with these people, I think we need to cultivate an owner's mindset. And what I'm saying right now is what I see in founders. So I'm trying to say, to work with them, this is what I see in founders, and I think as professionals, we should cultivate it ourselves. One is an owner's mindset, always concern for the company's excellence, always on, having the highest energy and passion. Second is drastically new ways of working, because either you find a way or you make one, just getting things done. That intensity, within the constraints of, not constraints, the parameters of your values, that's the only thing I would say. Getting not at any cost, and that's where I think the professional, your values, your personal values, your professional values come in the element of that. But the thought around finding new ways of working, taking a call. I spoke about a wrong decision is better than no decision. That's a thing that I would take. I would look at most startups have a value system, and I think the value system many times resonate with what the founder believes in or the founder along with the leadership team believe in. And I think that is another one that I would anchor towards whenever you're in doubt and feeling about how can I make a difference over here. At the end of the day, it's about building trust and being authentic. And here's where the caution part, or what you say, the negative part of what you spoke about comes in. I would say being authentic means that if there is limited match or no match between you or the founder, or the organization that you're working with from a value standpoint, then recognize it and walk away from it. What Hari also mentioned, one part of what Hari mentioned was, hey, if he thinks time is over, he walks out. I think a part that maybe he implied in what you spoke about, Meenakshi, was around the fact around, hey, I mean, if it's okay to say you made a mistake and walk out as well. I think being authentic to yourself, who you are as an individual, what the organization is or the founder is also, I think, important. And there's no point kind of, increase the pain for the organization, the founder, or for you, if you find at some point in time that there's a mismatch there. But I would say on any given day, if for you, like, again, you want to switch, irrespective of whatever, however much of conversations you want to have, people you want to meet, it's a risk worth taking at some point in time in your career. And the learnings out of that risk that you take will far out, because the change is so high, it's so different that you'll just, in my way, give you a fresh lease of life or a fresh extension of your career and just make you think very, very differently. Working with the founder is very intense, and I would say it's just fantastic.
Fantastic. And I want to caution the audience, we may be a little biased here on this call because we are all with similar views of more likability towards startup environment and succeeding. Not so much, but I think that could be still a blind spot here. And I think there is no right or wrong, like even all of you actually mentioned this. If this doesn't work out for you, maybe a structured environment and a large organization with more visibility and less ambiguity, less chaos could be the right career choice for a professional. So it's not necessarily that we are putting in startup career as at a higher pedestal. So I don't, just calling it out because I don't want that to be an inference here. But thanks so much. Now I want to go back to Hari for that question that I was trying to remember and not leave out. But thanks to Zoya. Zoya has asked the same question that I had in my mind, that, and I'm going to read it out to you, Hari. Zoya writes, Hari sir talked about choosing great teams. How do we choose the right team? What was the thought process he had before any switch? That was exactly my thought to come back to you on, because you made these decisions and you confidently said that you've never been able to have a wrong choice. So that will be an interesting takeaway for all of us to learn from, of what's really your mental model of really assessing that team that you join. And maybe we can learn from that.
Sure. So I think mental models are very, very personal. I think you need to figure out what your algorithm is, what works best for you. So I've been a very quick decision maker. I quickly make out what's right, what's not right. I know what I like, what I don't like. I'm a reasonably, I would say, very highly self-aware individual. And therefore, I'm able to figure out things quickly. So for example, I got married, the decision to get married to a particular individual was taken, in just about 2 hours. It was just a 2-hour meeting, not even a meeting, it was a train ride. And it's not that I knew her from before or something. So I think it's in all of us to be able to judge people quickly. You can get lost in paralysis. You will want to do 100 conversations. You will want to do all of that. But I think if you're reasonably clear, you intuitively figure out who is the person you will get along well with, who is the person you will respect. I think authenticity, it's like interviewing candidates, right? What do you interview in a 90-minute meeting? Obviously, you will do reference checks, informal reference checks, but in that 90 meeting, to make it effective, you need to be able to figure out what that other person is. Will that other person fit in or not? And somewhere you are doing that when you're talking to various people in your life. And that's about, companies that you're looking at joining. It could be about many other, personal judgments that you make along the way. And it's not that I haven't made mistakes. It's just that, these 5 startups that I've chosen to work for, I think I've enjoyed all of them. I have no regrets. I've, been an integral part of all of them wholeheartedly. And even when I chose to leave, it was at a particular point, where it was natural for me to leave, which is, for example, Daksh got acquired by IBM. I didn't want to go back to an IBM equivalent or Tata Steel equivalent company once again, So we had a management team had a contract to stay on for 2 years. Exactly the 2 years were over and I was off. Virtusa, we ran it, listed it on NASDAQ. The moment it became a public company, we ran it for a year. I realized running a public company quarter on quarter as part of a management team is not my cup of tea. I don't like to run it. in a predictable way. That's not my cup of tea at all. So I moved on. So my choices to move on also were very thoughtfully done. So I'm not saying that I never made mistakes in life, but just that this particular algorithm has worked for me. I'm intuitive. I work very quickly. I take decisions very quickly about the kind of people I will associate with, people I will not associate with. And I genuinely feel it's not very difficult to figure out who are the kind of people you will gel with, whose thoughts you will, find resonance with, what kind of values alignment is required. And the question is, probably you will ask me is that how do you quickly judge, whether there's a values alignment or not? There are many ways. If you cannot figure out values alignment in the startup ecosystem, then you're not worth your salt. If you don't know the ecosystem well enough, if you don't know which founder, which company represents what kind of values, then you shouldn't even be here. You should be, doing something else. So I think you already have a good sense of, the ecosystem, who stands for what company stands for what. You have a reasonably good sense. And I think a meeting is just formalizing that a little bit and getting a face to a name and just getting a bit of face time and interaction. So I think, for me, it's worked very well. I've been intuitive, quickly able to decide things. It's worked very well for me.
So just curious, Hari, have you taken the decision?
I'll just add one thing to Hari. Okay, see, Hari. I guess Hari is an expert in this one. So completely kind of completely realize where he's coming in from. I would just say for a lot of people who maybe haven't made that switch. And adding to the point that Meenakshi was making, it may not be obvious, it may not be as obvious, because I think when a startup is hiring, it could be a very different element about what it pitches to what it actually is when it comes to actually doing it. Right? I think that level of, I would say, say-do ratio, in a larger company, and I'm not blaming a startup for this. I'm just saying there are a lot of things in the ecosystem that a startup can get hit with. Just given the changes in stuff that can happen to them because they're still finding their feet. So I think at some level of time, besides all the information that you can get or you can't get, or besides what you learn, you got to eventually jump in with your, with your feeling about, what you think about it. So it is always going to be a risk. It'll be a bigger risk than maybe joining a company that you kind of, know. And I would just say that doing a certain level of diligence for people who haven't worked in a startup, haven't joined a startup, I think could be something which is good. What I'm trying to tell you, it may not be as A plus B equal to C, for somebody coming from the other side, as somebody who's already in the ecosystem and knows the ecosystem very, very well. That's just a difference I'm trying to make within. Whereas an established company, there's enough written about it, there's enough existence about it, it's more established there. Here, many times, there are companies at different scales of evolution, Series A, Series B, just starting up, whatever. Person may not have all the information as easily, knowing, since they aren't from that ecosystem. If that makes sense.
Yes, of course.
Yes, absolutely. And any questions, any comments, reflections from the audience? Please feel free to unmute yourself and speak, or put this in the chat. Bhagat, please do help me if I missed anything in the chat. If there are any more questions that came in and went up. While probably more reactions and comments come in, I'm thinking more, because you made a sports analogy, Rohit. That entire mindset of playing to win and playing not to lose, right? That difference in people, and I think it's not a startup versus a established organization. It's more individual, like Hari mentioned. It's more about the individual mindset. So would it be safe, how has your experience been, all three of you? Maybe you can take this. Have you found more people who are playing to win in the startup ecosystem?
Let's start with Hari. I think Hari has to drop off. So Hari, why don't you go first?
Yes, probably I think more people play to win in the startup ecosystem, and not that's I think because the reward is much closer, and the reward is also very obvious. What exactly is a measure of success, I think, is also very clear. In a larger company, the journey is much longer, and therefore the correlation between the kind of effort that you put and the outcome is not as straightforward as in a startup. So I think the desire for getting to a goal is much stronger there.
Thank you so much, Hari. And I didn't notice your comment on the chat. So thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Ankur. Thanks, Meenakshi. Thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry, thanks so much. Meenakshi, you want to go next?
I can, but you can go, Rohit, and then I can take on and add to your point.
So I again, like I don't think there's a difference. I think it is a personal attribute. People who are high performers play to win in any environment. Like I said, the intensity of what you stay to lose in a startup, the risk is much higher, right? So in that case, I think I would just say there could be more risk takers in general in a startup, or both people who never worked in an established company working in a startup are higher risk takers. People who come from established companies to this are higher risk takers, just because the nature of the animal is a higher risk, right? So, but people who win eventually are winners in any environment, because their attitude, their approach is there. And for me, again, in my analogy of people running from the US and being happy when they come back to India and stop being miserable, is, what is the attitude and the approach that you're taking? In a perfectly great company, growing at, established company, stock price going from $100 to $300. I've seen people who are like always cribbing, always, what am I doing over here? It's so boring, it's so lousy, whatever. And in startups, which are depressing, going down, whatever, I've seen people who are saying, hey, amazing, let's kind of, crack this, So I think it's more a personal demeanor or an approach to life or what they're doing than attributing to a startup or not. That's at least my point of view.
No, I completely agree. I think if you were to, it'll be interesting study to and research to do. I'm thinking maybe after another decade of working, I should do that research. Is that if you were to sort of pick up talent that is truly a benchmark talent across all ecosystems, I think you will find a core which is very similar. And if you were to sort of pick up teams, and there would be nuances which will be sharper, like Rohit said, there's a lot more to lose in startup if you don't win and win fast. You need to align very quickly. Once you agree and commit, then you agree and commit and move. You don't aim for perfection because you don't know what the perfection is. You have less layers and less bureaucracy, right? But similarly, in large organizations, you would have more support, more cash flows, more ability to sort of take risks because it's not a matter of survival, more ability to do and balance long term. So I think there are great sort of enablers in all ecosystem, right? But I think if Messi was to play in different teams, I think he would still be Messi, right? Or a Tendulkar would still be a Tendulkar, and right? I think what a whole lot that you bring together is in you, and if it's different places are just a way for you to get sharper, stronger, sharpen your muscle. I think if you inherently know where your purpose is, if you inherently are a strong player, and unless you're in a very, very bad context, then you would take a call very quickly and move onto a team where you're most suited for, because that can happen. I don't want to say that doesn't happen. That happens with everybody. The best of the leaders and the best of the players are built on long list of failures they've had, or long list of mistakes they would have made, and nobody talks about them. I'm happy to talk. I have made many mistakes in my career of 2 decades, right? But the idea is, have you gotten up, learned from them, brushed off, and moved on to be stronger, right? So I think the teams and individuals who win, I think, have very similar characteristics. The contexts are very different. Adaptation to that context is most important. That's what I would say.
Well said. And you reminded me of some interviews with Sachin Tendulkar where he expressed how low he felt despite being who he is when the team was not winning, and when he was not winning as a team, he was not winning the World Cup. And so I think on contrary, while absolutely agree with both of you, I think there could be, and as you rightly alluded to, Meenakshi, that there could be a Sachin Tendulkar or a high performer or a great leader which has the mindset of playing to win in a context which is probably not working out, which is not having the feeling of success or fulfillment. and then probably gets into another zone where that person may feel that this is not really the right space for me, and probably that's the time to walk out. I missed one question in the chat. So there is a question that Pankaj Mishra had asked, that it will be difficult to handle uncertainties like pandemic in startups where business dynamics can change and one has to pivot. Any experience on that impact on business and employees? So, I think that will be useful if you have some stories to share.
I can take it on, and then I would invite Rohit to sort of come in. I think e-commerce in generally gained during the pandemic because a lot of B2C happened, right? But e-commerce like ours, which is business to business, because our customers are kirana stores and the manufacturers and the sellers, actually faced a very significantly tough time during the pandemic. Yeah, so we did get a fillip in terms of a better. Still, online sort of behavior got accelerated, but there was an issue because the biggest category we were dependent on was discretionary spend category as a company, and that category got very hugely hit in the first wave of pandemic. Yeah, so we had to pivot actually twice over because nobody was expecting the second wave of pandemic to be as sharp as we could. I think what we did is, and I would credit the co-founders. Actually, what they did after the first pandemic is that they dealt with it. They actually spent a lot of energy in building strong capabilities and hiring great talent as they were even making the pivot. And that talent actually enabled pivots to happen much more sharply. So it did happen. I think parts of it got a active support and fillip. Part of it was a necessary pause for many startups to build and pivot in the right direction and scale up in the right manner. And we actually talk about in Udaan that the two pandemics gave us the needed pause to build the right model, build the right capability, bring on the right talent, and still move ahead with speed of what was needed. So that's what I would say. So Udaan as a company, if I give you that example, I think 70% of people, I call them COVID babies. They were hired during the COVID pandemic, right? As we started coming back to office, and of course, our people were also always in the market. Warehouses were operational. Many people were meeting people for the first time, right? And they've worked for the company 18 months, 2 years. 70% of the org got hired in that period, and we expanded to cities in that period. So actually, in a way, we felt blessed, because we actually ended up meeting our purpose. The kirana stores whose offline distribution model got completely disrupted. They couldn't get goods and sell in small towns and cities of this country, got stuff from us. It was a hard period to run an essential services business because employee safety got hit, and you still had to pivot. So it wasn't an easy time, but we couldn't have done it without the pause and honestly the talent strength that we built with people. That's what I would say.
Excellent. Rohit?
I think very similar. So I think the example is great. I would just say for us also in Lead, we were 500 people before the pandemic. We were 2,000 when the pandemic finished. So 3/4 of the organization has happened. We've grown 4x over the last 2 years. And I think we were one of the companies in the entire B2B EdTech space, school EdTech space, that really in a very agile fashion. If you think of schools, I mean, we're talking about tier 2, tier 3 schools, not the category A schools, where even having a kind of a feature phone, kind of a smartphone is a big deal, for the parents of the children never have them in any case. So, I mean, how we really pivoted in a certain sense, and we grew 4x over the last 2 years. And I think that's where, again, the agility part, how you come up with the product team, the tech team, the curricular team. I mean, all these teams coming together. And there are many stories like us, like both Meenakshi and mine, of teams that have been able to, I would say, fortunately, because I think nobody knew at that point in time it's going to be 2 years. Nobody knew the impact of what, they were just taking, okay, there's some shortage for some time. We've stopped going to offices, have stopped or whatever else. And this just went on for 2 years, right? So now we can say, hey, 2 years we grew 4x, but I think it's more about how the teams kind of, adapted to that entire element. And I think many companies, again, large established ones and startups have really changed through that. So I think it comes down again in my mind. I still, and I would tell this to, I would say my story, I think it's not so much about startups versus organized companies. It's more about the mindset that that the founders or the teams in startups or in large companies have, because there are many startups I'm sure in your space, Meenakshi, in my space also, who were not able to adapt to kind of who bet on something in their best interest was the right decision, but it turned out wrong. So I think these are more management elements. So I really wouldn't create so much of a gap between a startup and a established company. I think it's more the evolved ecosystem versus a kind of maturing ecosystem, and it's more around the philosophy of establishing the company from scratch, and the kind of challenges of that come with that, and what a mindset is needed for that versus a company that is already growth, is already established, and how does one kind of continue innovating, continue growing, continue facing competition. That's the way I'm looking at it's just a different surface. Like I mentioned earlier as well, it's a different surface. You got to adapt to that surface. It's not a different game. It's not tennis and badminton. It's still tennis, right? So it's just about the surface that you play in. So for people who are trying for it, go for it. Okay, don't think that the gap is like too wide or it's too different.
So I'm going to take the liberty of asking maybe a couple of more questions, because we or no, I will give preference to people in the chat first.
Yeah, let's take the questions. There was a question just now. Pandemic expanded the role of HR. Meenakshi, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. I think I don't know whether it has expanded the role of HR, but it definitely did put HR in the center of a lot of decision making and leadership, where you had to own and run. Because I think, and you've linked to your previous question. I was heading HR for GSK for India, and actually also for a global category. So it was very interesting when the first wave happened, and I was all packed, set to go to London when the lockdown got announced. Thank God I would have gotten stuck there. But and then in the peak of the pandemic of wave 1 in August, I moved to Udaan actually, and I think the kind of, because there was no playbook. I remember the health minister of Maharashtra called some of us as HR heads to say, hey, what do we need to do? What's going to happen? We were thinking whether the local should be shut down. How will the pandemic get supported? From a government to the local municipality to organizations and global organizations that were working across globally, and specifically both my companies were essential services. You couldn't stop manufacture of medicine and distribution of medicine, and you couldn't stop e-commerce in the country, right? So I think both of those were essential services. I think a lot of questions were directed to, hey, how do you handle this? What do you do? A lot of leadership was to be taken, and decision-making had to be done. I remember sitting on the table and taking a decision whether our field force would go in the market or not, and how, and whether our warehouses will operate or not. And then how do we talk to the union, which is saying, in the pandemic, why should a manufacturing plant operate while we understand we manufacture medicine, to coming into e-commerce, which was a startup, pivoting, business impacted. I think, how do you take the call of balancing customer, employee, care, speed of innovation, agility, onboarding, expansion? I think it did bring in a lot of, I think in a very good way, did bring in a lot of muscle that HR had to lead with and as a function, and I think did fantastically well, honestly, as a function. I feel very proud of the community, if you ask me, in how companies adapted. Nothing stopped. You heard Rohit speak, right? I think every company expanded. If they had to expand, we hired. There was nobody who knew what is, remote working was still getting discussed. And all of a sudden, remote is like here and now, and people are discussing, do we go back to office? Right? We, companies innovated on policies, helped leaders adapt, see a particular point of view, became more empathetic as organizations. And I think leaders did a great job too. So I think great muscle. I think it did expand. I'm not sure about expanded, but I think it did bring to the fore some really crucial elements of HR, which sometimes sort of go in the background of enabling business, and actually more than enabling business, leading business. I actually don't think enabler and supporter is the right term for HR, actually. Right? I think leading business is and should be. So that's what I would say. And well done, each one of you. It was not an easy job. It was not an easy job sitting and being in HR through pandemic, figuring out from ambulance support to being a listening post to hiring to personalizing onboarding, coaching leaders. So I think well done all of you on the call in HR across industries, actually.
All right, fantastic. And, we will close it quickly, Rohit. Conscious of your catching a flight. And, just to close on that thought, Meenakshi, I personally think HR today is doing a similar role like, if you remember, Akbar and Birbal. So I think Birbal's role is what's HR role today. Whatever is working fine, Akbar can manage that, but whatever is not working, that lands on the HR desk and that needs to be solved. So I think a problem solver and a true entrepreneur, in a sense, is an HR leader today. So conscious of the time, I want to pass it on quickly to the team to close. Sonal, over to you.
Thank you so much, Meenakshi, Rohit, and Ankur, and Hari in his absence. I think it's it's been a very engaging conversation. I think it was fairly well-rounded. I think you could, on one hand, you could say everything was the same, like Rohit mentioned. All organizations work with the growth mindset. It doesn't matter if large or small. So everything is the same. Or, like we say, it was from one era to the other and choices to be made were different. So it could also sound very different. I think the ground that we covered in the last 1.5 hours, thank you, Ankur, for weaving in everyone's point of view. It is not easy to do, especially in the virtual world where questions are streaming from everywhere. So much to learn from each one of you. Thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of this chat. And I'm sorry if anyone felt that any of the questions remain unanswered. The intention was, to weave everything in. So we are here, and I'm sure Meenakshi, Rohit, Ankur, and Hari, outside of this conversation, would also happily answer questions. So thank you, everyone, and have a great evening and afternoon ahead.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks so
everybody.
much. All the best. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. And Rohit, you have a good flight.
Thank you.
And others, what happens on a virtual call is that we shut off immediately. But in an offline mode, we would just stand up from our seat. We will move out. We'll still chit chat. So I would encourage each one of you, while Rohit may have to run to catch a flight, others, feel free to switch on your video, and maybe if you want to take the opportunity to talk about whether this was useful, not useful. Even I think we need to learn to, agree to disagree as well as one of the life skills. So if this is not useful, give us your inputs on what would you like the future sessions to be. And then I'm sure with this fantastic team of Delhi NCR chapter led by Yuvraj, they will leave no stone unturned to make sure all of you get the experience of learning and connecting with other people in the community that you wish for. So I'd encourage all of you to sort of probably take a minute, switch on your video, come on to audio, talk about whatever you want to talk about, and we're all listening.
Everybody.
Yes, I noticed someone was speaking. I'm here. Yeah.
Well, if nobody else is speaking, I would just like to say that getting out of comfort zone is the necessary condition for growth. But if one really feels uncomfortable with comfort zone, the startup might be a good place for her. I mean, that is how I see that. It requires that added urge to be uncomfortable with the comfort zone. Thank you.
Well said, sir. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for coming on video, Zoya. Would you want to say something? Maybe a reflection of how was the session, anything you took away, or anything you want the team to focus on for future sessions?
It was very insightful. The entire session was very amazingly, everything was good. It was in a very well-structured manner. And as a student, I would like to say that it is a great platform for all the students who've joined today, because hearing from such great, experienced people, it's an amazing honor for every one of us, and a great, learning way for every one of us who've joined today. A lot of us are here. I think students, most of us are students. So yes, it was a great opportunity for all of us. Thank you. We would love to have more such discussions and be a part of it.
Fantastic. So a great beginning to have this company of leaders so early on is a blessing. So definitely keep investing your time on these conversations. And tomorrow, who knows, 10 years down the line, we'll be inviting Zoya for a conversation on something. You know, life goes like that. So thanks so much for sharing that. I see Yuvraj is on the road.
Thank you. I think Ankur, superb job done. I think I have spent so much of time in startups now, but I believe the type of insights all the speakers shared today and the way you anchored the session, I think many newer things for all of us to learn. I have personally picked up many things. Thanks to each one of you, especially to you for really making it so interesting. And I think Hari with his rich experience, Meenakshi with his experience with Udaan and earlier with GSK, Rohit with his 2 companies experience, I think that they could really bring out some of the very relevant insights for the young HR professionals. So thanks for getting this out from everyone. Thank you, Ankur.
No, thank you, Yuvraj. You are being very kind, and I must confess in front of everyone that this is how a good leader looks like. And I hope you don't mind. This is how I operate. So this is who I am. You know, when Yuvraj called me to say you host this session, I said, why should I host? Why are you not doing it? You are more than capable to do it. And he, you know, like a good leader, he wanted to play the orchestra from behind and did a great job of that. And I think I must also confess, none of these thoughts were my thoughts. This was reflections of Yuvraj, which I got on a platter. I did go through it and I did feel the value of it. And I did not just do it because I got it. I felt this was value for doing these conversations, and maybe 1 or 2 I may have added, but large part of it was a playbook that I got.
You are being humble and modest like always. Please don't be that. I think that you are a professional in this field, Ankur. We are learning from you, while maybe senior in age with you. But I think I'll thank everybody on behalf of Delhi NCR and HRDN. We are looking forward to do some exciting conversations which are far more in the right context and also will make a lot of sense for the young HR professionals and professionals at large. So please keep reaching out to us and sharing your thoughts with us so that we can further curate such interesting conversations. Thank you so much, Ankur. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Sonal.
Ayushi. Thank you, Surekha,
Thank you.
for
Thanks.
your comments. Thank you,
Thanks.
Sonal, for your
Thanks, Sonal.
comments.
Thanks, Sonal. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Thank everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I would fail if I don't thank Bhagat for being the invisible force behind putting all of this together. I know it takes a lot of effort. Thank you so much, Bhagat and team.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Ankur. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks.